everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing a reading wrap-up of my 2023 January books. I finally found a use for my library card, and that is keeping track of how many books I read each month. Starting off this video, we will talk about my book from my 23 books to read in 2023, and I only managed to read one, and that was Lost in the Moment and Found, which released on January 10th, but overall I absolutely loved it. I love this series and I highly recommend it. I was able to read a total of 18 books this month, so just coloring in the corresponding number of boxes. Overall, this was a very high quality reading month for me. I had a lot of 4- and 5-star reads, probably the most 5-star reads I've ever had in a month, which we will get to later when I go through all of those. But obviously I'm not trying to stay within the lines on this one, but a good start to the 2023 reading year. Next up, we have my physical TBR spread. I managed to find some numbered stickers to help me keep track of the 24 physical TBR books I have on my list this year. I was able to read 3, which I'm very excited about, including Heart of the Sun Warrior by Sue Lin Tan, The Book Eaters by Suni Dean, and Blood Scion by Deborah Fillay. I also acquired 3 of the January releases this month, including Daughter of Izdahir, Hellbent, and Spice Road. All 3 are books on my 23 books to read in 2023. Next up is one of my favorite spreads and yearly challenges to do, and that is the ABC Challenge. I read 5 books this month that fill in the 5 corresponding letters, and that is Blood Scion for B, Heart of the Sun Warrior for H, Into the Riverlands for I, Lost in the Moment and Found for L, and Ninth House for N. All of these are book covers that I printed onto sticker paper. If you're interested in using similar sticker paper in any of your journals, I have a link below in the description. Moving on to my favorite book of January, which was The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. The 3rd book of this series comes out later this year, so I'm finally getting around to this series, and I was blown away. I absolutely loved it. Our theme in January for book club was wellness, so I selected The Finnish Way by Katja Pensar. Next up is my own personal reading challenge this year, which is to read more books by BIPOC authors. I messed up a little bit because while I did read 3 books by Black authors, 2 of them were by the same author, so I did color in 3 flowers instead of just the 2. While for AAPI authors, I managed to read 5 books by 4 different AAPI authors, so I colored in the correct corresponding flowers on that section. Now we have arrived at my January section for my January reads. I'm only going to feature my favorite or top reads of this month. I had a few 2-star reads, so I don't really want to feature those because if I were to put 150 books, which is my goal for this year in this journal, I would run out of pages. So that's why I'm only selecting my favorite reads, and I don't really want to talk about the books that I didn't like that much. I'd much rather share my favorite books with you all. As you can see, my title page is built like all of my other pages in this journal with overlapping scrapbook paper. All of this I acquired at Michael's. And per usual, keeping it very simple, nothing too intricate with my setups this year. Something new that I decided to do in 2023 was keep better track of the statistics of the books that I read, I did start a Storygraph account so that I could keep track of that better. I had 6 categories that I was most interested in keeping track of, and that is the demographics of the authors and characters in the books, the genre, the mood, the rating, the format, and the publisher of the books I read. Of the 18 books I read in January, 10 were written by Caucasian authors, 3 were written by Black or African authors, 5 were written by AAPI Middle Eastern authors, and 5 of the books I read had prominent LGBTQIA representation. The prominent genre that I read this month was fantasy, with 13 of the 18 books being in the fantasy category. The main mood of the books I read were adventurous, mysterious, and emotional, as well as dark. And then I was able to read 4 5-star rated books, 5 4-star rated books, 7 3-star rated books, and 2 2-star rated books. The majority of the books I read were in an audio format, with 53% of the books being audiobooks, 35% being digital formatted books, and 12% being printed books. 15 of the books I read were traditionally published, while 3 were published by indie authors. Next up is the fun part, putting in the reviews for the top books that I read this month in order of when I read them, starting with High Times in the Low Parliament by Kelly Robson. This was one of those surprising finds. While scrolling through the library, I was working on a project and needed a shorter audiobook to listen to, and this fit the bill perfectly. This centers around a rebellious scribe, Lana, who only cares about 2 things, good times and girls, but when she's assigned to be a scribe at the next Low Parliament, Lana must work together with a feisty fairy and dedicated deputy in order to save humanity. But since our heroine is fantastic at multitasking, there's no reason why she can't partake in a bit of flirting while she's at it. I rated this 4 stars. Next up, we have Wild is the Witch by Rachel Griffin. I was so enthralled with this book the entire time. This is my first Rachel Griffin book, and I can see why she is so popular. Her writing style is so melodic. I felt like I was back in the Pacific Northwest while reading this, which is where the book takes place, and through Griffin's writing, I went through all of the same emotions of the characters. This book centers around Iris, who's desperate to keep her secret of being a witch in order to save herself from the hurt that she's experienced before relocating to Washington with her mom. Now they run an animal refuge together with the help of Pike, the infuriating intern that loves antagonizing her. But when a cursed owl escapes the refuge, they both must venture into the woods to find him before the curse is unleashed and Iris's secret is revealed, all of which could result in unspeakable consequences for both her and the boy she's starting to fall for. This was a really great rivals to lovers YA fantasy, and I gave it 4 stars. Next up is another YA fantasy, Hotel Magnifique by Emily J. Taylor. This was a lot more violent than I was expecting for a young adult fantasy, to be honest, but I really liked it. Even the main characters were not safe from the violence of the antagonist. While this was by no means anything original, since I was getting a lot of Caraval Night Circus vibes, I still enjoyed the story. It was incredibly fast-paced, and it was very easy to root for Johnny as our MC. If you like magical environments, mysterious love interests, sisterly devotion, and endless MacGuffins, then this book is definitely for you. I listened to this on audiobook and I gave it 4 stars. Next up is my favorite book of January, The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. This is book 1 in the series. Book 2 is The Bone Shard Emperor, with the 3rd book, The Bone Shard War, coming out later this year. It has been a while since I read a high fantasy that I engaged with so thoroughly. The Bone Shard Daughter is the first in a series about a kingdom of islands ruled by an emperor who possesses the power to create beings, or constructs in this case, from shards of bone that he quote-unquote collects from his subjects. Following the lives of 5 characters throughout the book, including the Emperor's own daughter, this story takes you across the Empire and into the lives of the people most impacted by this invasive magic, one that had me completely engrossed. I gave it 5 stars. Continuing on with more 5-star reads, we have Heart of the Sun Warrior, which is the sequel to Daughter of the Moon Goddess, one of my favorite books from 2022. The sequel takes place about a year after the events of Daughter of the Moon Goddess, and I will say that I am always so in awe of Sue Lantan's writing. It's like I can taste the food that she describes and even like feel the fabrics of the clothes her characters are wearing with the way that she describes things in her books. It's the perfect amount of description and detail for me, and it all just lulls me into a trance when I read her books. This book was high on my anticipated reads for this year, and so I'm finally glad that I was able to get a hold of it through my library, and I enjoyed every second of it. This book is similar in terms of ebbs and flows with the plot, periods of stillness in between big battles or intense escape scenes, some of which resulted in some character deaths. All of them are extremely hard to read, which means Sue did her job in making you really care for these characters, but definitely a 5-star read for me. Next up is The 6 Deaths of the Saint by Alex E. Haro. I had one of the shortest but most enthusiastic reviews for this book, which was only 30 pages, but it was by far 30 of the best pages I've ever read, and it's available on Kindle Unlimited. And again, another 5-star read for me. Next on my list is a book that's been on my TBR for quite some time, and that's Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I figured since Hellbent was finally coming out this year that I would get around to reading this so that I was prepared for the sequel, and I'm glad I did, because 3 years, maybe even 4 years in between these books, I definitely would have forgotten what happened. But for me, the characters are what kept me engaged with this book. The premise was interesting, and it had elements that kept me in suspense, but our 3 main characters are what I enjoyed the most. Alex is a very complex character. Through her ability to see the dead, she's not only endured horrific trauma at the hands of the ghosts that she sees, but has turned towards self-destructive means in a way of coping. It's not until a terrible loss that she's given a chance to attend Yale as a member of a secret society that polices other secret societies. Working with her mentor Darlington and the very amusing Dawes, Alex must solve the murder of a local girl while also dealing with the recent disappearance of Yale's golden boy. I gave it 3 stars. Next up is Into the Riverlands. This is book 3 in the Singing Hill series by Neve Vo. Once again, we follow Chi and Almost Brilliant as they accompany a group of travelers as they make their way through the dangerous region of the Riverlands, sharing long-forgotten stories of deadly warriors, frightening bandits, and heroic rescues. Chi learns from his companions about the fascinating history of a very misunderstood people and place. I gave it 4 stars. Next up are 2 of my physical TBR books. First, The Book Eaters by Suni Dean. This is kind of a dark academia book. I've seen others classify it in this genre of fantasy. It does take place in the, I guess, kind of the darker places of England, and of course there are lots of books involved as the characters do eat books for sustenance, but it's one of the more unique dark fantasy stories I've read in a while, focusing on a secret group of beings called book eaters, people who live off the sustenance of consuming books or any kind of paper printed material. In one instance, kids are forced to eat dictionaries as a form of punishment due to their bitter taste. It was quite clever, and the story focuses on Devon, a rare female member of a book eater family. Due to the species' inability to bear females, the few women who do exist are passed around from family to family in order to bear children to a very patriarchal order, while their children are taken from them. The conflict occurs when Devon gives birth to a boy who is a mind eater, which is someone who feeds off the minds of people rather than books. So in order to save his life, they must go on the run, where we in turn learn more about Devon's life growing up, and we encounter other mind eaters who she teams up with in order to keep her son safe and get him the medicine he needs to curb his appetite. I gave it 3 stars. Next up is Blood Scion by Deborah Fellier. Brutality is a very common theme throughout this book. Our main character, Sloane, is practically fighting for her life starting from the very beginning of chapter 1. When she's conscripted into the army, she must do unspeakable things, not only to survive, but to hide her true identity. Because if anyone were to find out what she truly is, a scion, then she'll be killed on the spot. Sloane is able to find allies within her squadron and work on controlling her scion powers, but as the time to take revenge on those in power, she learns that in the end it will be up to her and her alone. This was my fourth and final 5-star read of January. Next, we have one of my 23 books to read in 2023, and that is Lost in the Moment and Found by Seanan McGuire. This is the 7th book in the Wayward Children series, and this is one of my all-time favorite series. I discovered it last year, and I flew through the first 6 books that were available, and so I've been waiting a while for this one to come out, and once I got it from the library, I read it immediately, and I absolutely loved it. It was darker than some of the previous installments of this series, but it still had all of those amazing elements that I loved about the previous installments. Focusing on a new character, Ansi, we journey through a tragic life event and everything that follows until she stumbles through her door. Rather than a singular world, Ansi enters the place where lost things go, a nexus that gives her access to all kinds of worlds, but at a heavy cost. I gave this book 4 stars. And lastly, we have the Binti books, books 2 and 3 by Nnedi Okorafor. These are novella sci-fi books that take place at a high-ranking university in the galaxy, but our main character Binti must travel home after her first year to introduce her new friend, who also just happens to be a part of the species that has been at war with humans for quite some time, so she is there to broker peace. Both books do take place, for the majority, back on Earth, which is, I think, why I didn't like these too much. I liked it when she was at school or when she was in space. These are sci-fi books after all, and I think because of the shortness of these books, you just really couldn't get that invested in the other characters that were introduced, so I think I would have liked these a lot more if they were just a bit longer. I gave both of them 3 stars. That wraps up my reading for January 2023. If you like some of the books that I read, be sure to follow me on Goodreads, which is linked in the description. And if you like these videos in general, be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of my upcoming videos and my upcoming wrap-ups of February's reading, which I will have at the beginning of next month. But until then, happy reading!